The Michigan Atheist State Convention will be held November 17th, 18th, and 19th at the Holiday Inn, Livonia West. Included in our speakers is Michigan's own Dr. Gregory Forbes, Professor of Biological Sciences and Civic Libertarian of the Year. From Virginia will be Mr. Rick Wingrove, American Atheist Capitol Hill Representative and Virginia State Director. And also from Virginia will be Ms. Ellen Birch, a descendant of Thomas Jefferson and atheist activist. And from California, Dr. Michael Newdow, atheist, lawyer, medical doctor, and entertainer. Beyond speaking at our convention, Dr. Newdow will perform for us at our luncheon on Saturday. On Friday, we will have a welcoming dinner party for our speakers, and on Sunday, we will visit Henry Ford Museum to view the exhibit Liberty and Justice for All. I'm Arlene Marie, Michigan State Director, and I hope you will join us for our state convention on November 17th, 18th, and 19th. For further information, please visit our website, www.michiganatheist.org.
Hello, I'm Robert Haas of Michigan Atheists, and with me today I have Spike Tyson. Spike is a veteran of the Vietnam War, and he is a Purple Heart recipient and has been an active atheist for a number of years. First of all, well, during the time you served, we were in the middle of the Cold War, and I would imagine at that time that it was very, very unpopular to be an atheist. You know, there was the phrase that went around, "Oh, you godless commie." Does that sound familiar?
Yes, it does, Robert. I'll tell you, it's never been an atheist in a foxhole really irritates me because, well, they weren't in my foxhole. And I'd met a lot of atheists in foxholes. I never saw a person sit down and go, "Oh," as the bullets were flying, because if they did that, they get shot. They don't do that. That's just BS nonsense. Let's face it, if you're in a combat situation, you really don't want to take the time out to do that. Your job is to protect yourself. Why would you sit there and go like this when you should be like this? It's a fun time. During the Cold War, and there's a big story about the Cold War and George Bush, and I'll have to get to that later on. But I was called a communist for so many times, it's not funny. And I was a theoretical communist and still am today. Now, a theoretical communist is a person that says government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's what true communism is. But what they mean today is this Marxist, Leninist, and all that other. It's junk. Let's be honest. If you were a religious person and you really believed in a God, why are you out there killing people? That's the problem with war, and that's the problem that these religious people have. They can't answer that question.
Yeah, because one of the things I hear is that you have the priests and ministers on both sides blessing the troops because they're both sure that God is on their side.
Mm-hmm. That's true. There was during World War II, the Germans had a belt buckle that said, "Gut mit uns," God is with us. Well, what happened? I think they lost. Does that mean that God is not very powerful? Or does it say, there isn't one, it doesn't work, it's not there? There are 8 million gods around the world that are prayed to every year, 8 million. The difference between you and I and those people out there, we just have one less than they do. They're pretty close to being an atheist. They just don't want to admit it.
That's a pretty interesting way of looking. I understand one of the first things when you go into the military is they make a set of dog tags for you. And on the dog tags, it has things like your name, rank, and serial number, and a religious preference.
That's correct, yes. And I've got one of mine here. Now, Bob hasn't seen this. On the top, it has my name, my serial number, my blood type, and I want Bob to read to you what's the bottom line. Go ahead, take it. Be easier for you to look at it.
Egomastic?
Egomastic. Now, somebody who did that thought that I was stuck on my ego. You can't have egomastic. It's a nonsense word. The man who typed this up got mad at me because I said I'm an atheist, and he would not put it on there. He put on instead egomastic. I had my butt chewed over and over again by officers because I had these dog tags. And we'll get a closer shot, hopefully, of them a little later on. But that was not allowed at that time. All that was allowed when I went in was Protestant, Catholic, and no preference.
Not even Jewish?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, I forgot the Jews. Well, they're only 2%. I didn't forget about them. But yeah, okay, Jewish was. Now we can have, I think there's 37 different items you can have on there now. Just like on the headstones. Back in my day, when I was in the military, you could only have Jewish, Catholic, or Protestant, or nothing. Well, now we can have 52 different items on the headstones. Atheist is number 17 on the list.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That was fought for by a number of people. Madalyn Murray O'Hair was in charge of that. And the first headstone ever to have it was Madalyn's second husband. And he's buried in Arlington. And they really don't want to tell you where it is. I've been to Arlington twice. Found with the Bible is you can take the Bible and take either side of any argument and argue it. If you're for abortion or not for abortion. Well, you're for war, not for war. You should masturbate, can't masturbate. What's the difference? They use the Bible for whatever they want. And that was actually developed that way. So you can take either side of the arguments. I think a better idea is just throw the Bible out. And why don't we just use the Constitution? Doesn't that make more sense?
Well, as for me, I put more faith in the 10 Amendments than I do in the 10 Commandments.
That's true. You know, because 8 of the 10 Commandments actually violate the Constitution.
Like freedom of religion and freedom of speech?
That's correct. Thou shalt have no other God before me. Well, that's a violation of the First Amendment right there. And there are 2 commandments that talk about having slaves. Now, wait a minute. Slavery isn't that against the law?
Oh, is that the command on keep holy the Sabbath? You're supposed to give your slaves the day off?
Yeah, you're supposed to give the slaves the day off. Well, that's against the 14th Amendment and a few others. And the Ku Klux Klan, this is one of the fun things I like, Ku Klux Klan uses the 10 Commandments in their argument that says slavery is correct. So why would we have the commandments up on a wall, which is what they're trying to do here in Michigan, called the Freedom Wall? The commandments are not about freedom. They're about repression of all kinds.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem there is that the commandments they show are a sanitized version of the commandments.
Yes, yeah, the shortened version because people don't have that much time to read the whole thing. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Well, the whole thing is thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, dog, horse, pig, chicken, and a whole bunch of things, and the slaves. Well, they don't want the people to know about all of the other things. That's why they make this shortened version. That shortened version was originally made, if my memory serves me correctly, sometime in the middle 800s. That's something, relatively speaking, modern.
Okay, well, getting back to your experience in the military, I presume that your comrades knew about your atheism, and how did they treat you about being so open?
Yeah, I went in the military at the ripe old age of 17 years and 2 weeks. And from the first day on, I was an open atheist. The trouble with my dog tags is one example. Another was not going to church. Everywhere I went, I was very open about not being religious. I had problems all over Germany. I had problems in Vietnam and back in the United States, in Fort Knox, Fort Lewis, Fort Dix, and a few others. One of the problems in Vietnam is you're out in the field, and occasionally you send out a priest, and if you don't go to the services, the captain is all over you because it looks bad for him. You know, well, who cares? You know, why should it reflect on the captain if I am an atheist? And yet on the official report, atheist did not go. So you're harassed and hassled by the captain to go.
So it's like a government agency is, taking church attendance statistics?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Just like they do in the Air Force Academy out in Boulder.
Heard about that their chaplains are using that to try to proselytize people to the one true religion.
Yeah, I know. The one true religion. Well, that's what they all say. Ours is the true one. Well, the fact of the matter is they're all the same. They go nowhere. They dissolve into nothingness once people figure them out.
Yeah, because I thought the whole purpose of the chaplaincy was to minister to those who already believed and to try to maintain their morale, and that they weren't supposed to proselytize.
Yep, that's right. They're not supposed to, but they do. The Marines have this attitude, it's for God and country. Wait a minute. I thought it was for the Constitution and the country. No, it's for God and country. No. There's another problem with the chaplains most people don't think about. If you're a Muslim, you get the same chaplain as the Christian. Hey, how can you do that? I mean, Christianity and Islam, although they're from the same roots, are not quite the same thing.
It is for all religious people. You consider your own religion's stories of miracles to be proof of God, whereas you view other religions' miracle stories as mere myths.
Yeah. Now, if you took our science today and you backed up 500 years, people would call everything we do right now miracles. How could you see something that's 10,000 miles away? We can. They couldn't back then. They couldn't even imagine the stuff we're doing today. Well, maybe with the exception of Leonardo da Vinci. He might have been able to think of some strange things. But, no. These stories about magic and mystical things.
Well, if you've been indoctrinated in that since childhood, it can be pretty hard to shake.
Yeah. It is far, far harder to believe than to think. That's why you always find more believers than thinkers. And once you're indoctrinated in it, it's hard to throw that yoke off. And that's a problem. One of the reasons I say that we should never indoctrinate the children in religion. It's bad for them. It really is. Religion is the worst thing you can teach a child. When you stop and think about it and you look at the statistics on the murders, the rapists, and just crime in general, you'll find that the people that commit 99% of them are religious. There is, percentage-wise, there is less than 0.1% of the people going into prison that are atheist. The other 99.9 are religious. Now, we make up, call it 12% of the population. We should have a corresponding 12% going into the prison. We don't. We're so moral, it's not funny. Now, the Roman Catholics make up about 30% of the population. They make up 62% going in the door. And they call themselves moral.
I can't begin to imagine what it must have been like to be in the middle of combat, bullets flying, and you're face to face with death. Have you ever wondered, well, what if I'm wrong? What if Christianity really is true? And what if I'm not ready to meet my Maker and I'll be judged guilty and condemned to hell? Did that ever concern you?
No, it never did. First of all, I know I'm not wrong, okay? But that's called Pascal's wager. And the reality is Pascal's wager has been proven false over and over and over again. You can do 3 shows on Pascal's wager. The second part of it, I did meet my Maker. It's called my mother, I don't know what their Maker is. Maybe it's an egg underneath a rock. I don't know. I've always wondered, what is their Maker? I know what mine was, my mother and my father. Well, according to them, of course.
I see you have on the table, you have a couple of medals. Would you like to explain what their significance is?
Sure. I only brought two of them with me. One is a Purple Heart. Anytime you see something on it, I don't know if the camera would get close, but we can always get a close-up later. That means you have one more. In the case of the Bronze Star, I've actually got 3 oak leaves on it, so I have a total of 4 Bronze Stars. And on the back, for all you people who don't know this, there is an engraving with a person's name. Now, if you ever turn over one of these and there's no name engraved or it's not the correct person, that means they bought it or they're faking it. And the specific font that is used in each one of these, the only time you can use this font is on these medals, and anybody who uses it, not of the government, it's a violation of federal law. And if you wear these and you don't actually have earned them, it's also a violation of federal law. Now, the Bronze Star is given out for either valor or for meritorious service. And I have 2 of each, and it's not the high end. There's silver stars above that, and then Congressional Medal of Honor at the very top and all. But I was, at the time, I was a E4, which is the same as a corporal in Vietnam, and an officer just getting off the plane, they gave him Bronze Stars. Just, here, have them, just for getting off the plane. Well, kind of like Ford, though, at least as long as they didn't stumble. And so they got away with it. Now, Kerry, if you remember correctly in the last election, John Kerry, it was talked about the Swift boat veterans and all that, and he got a Purple Heart, you know, during that one action. And he actually did. He got wounded and everything. But the Swift boat veterans, the funny thing about that is one of the Swift boat veterans actually got a Bronze Star for the same action. He said Kerry not only wasn't in, but never happened. Well, then why did he get a Bronze Star for it? There's a lot of liars out there. One of the problems is that there's roughly 2.5 million Americans who are Vietnam veterans. That's the official number from the military. And yet, according to the Census Bureau, there's 12.5 million Americans who claim to be Vietnam veterans. That means 4 out of every 5 you meet are fake. One of the ways to tell is on the back. Take a look at their medals and see if they're actually theirs. Chances are, 4 out of 5, they're not.
Now, what would you mean by a fake veteran? Like someone who joined during that time but was never sent there?
No, we call them wannabes. Being a Vietnam veteran has become sort of an in thing to do. And they don't want to admit that they got their draft deferment and they were in college or anything like that. And kind of like George Bush, he was a coward. You know, they don't want to admit it, you know. I've got a bumper sticker you'd love. It says, "I served, Bush deserted." Hey, it's true. And these wannabes, you find them everywhere. If you go online on the internet, there's actual websites up there with lists of names of wannabes that have been found out. When I was the adjutant for the Military Order of the Purple Heart, which is what this hat is for, down in Tucson, Arizona, approximately half of everybody that was in that unit was actually fake. And I spent pretty much most of my time weeding out the fake ones. The man who was on the Governor's Council for Veterans in Arizona was a Purple Heart, supposedly. Come to find out, he was in prison during the whole of the Vietnam War. He was never even in the military.
Well, it just seems so totally beyond the pale to claim something like that you did not do.
That's right. It's wrong. It's very wrong. On another similar to that, just this last week, I have been in contact with the state of Department of Motor Vehicles there, Terry Land, her office.
Terry Rand?
Yeah, Land, L-A-N-D, Lynn Land. And she's, her office is in charge of the plates and things like that, these specialty plates for cars. Well, there are people who don't have Purple Hearts and were never in Vietnam, but have plates that says Vietnam or Purple Heart. They don't check very well as to whether you actually did. It is so easy to fake what is called a DD-214 that more people are getting these plates just by turning in this fake piece of paper, and nobody checks it out. And personally, it irritates the hell out of me. It really does. I get angry. There's people that claim to have Congressional Medal of Honor. the highest award this country's got. And yet there's only about 150 of them left living today. And yet there's about 1,000 people who claim to have one. So come on, boys and girls, let's figure this one out.
Yeah, it really cheapens the value of the award when you have wannabes claiming it.
Yeah.
Oh, do you view an agnostic then as someone like an atheist who just does not have the courage to admit it?
Well, originally the term agnostic was coined because being an atheist was against the law in Great Britain. And that's why they coined the term agnostic. Huxley was the one that did it. And that's originally it meant being an atheist, but not being an atheist. And that's how they got around the legalities. Nowadays it means something different if somebody's sitting on a fence post. The reality is you've already said as an agnostic, no, there's absolutely no proof of a God, right? You've already said it. So why don't you use the A word, atheist?
You know, there's this one Christian talk show host, well, he likes to grill atheist activists, like he talked to Ellen Johnson once, and he used the argument of, well, do you know everything there is to know? And she admits no and says, well, is it possible that God exists in the 99.9+% of the universe that you don't know about?
Absolutely not. No God can exist. If you take a course in logic and critical thinking, that's the first thing you're going to learn. There's a logical proof that a God cannot exist. Now, it's a little too much to go into right now. Yeah. The truth is, it's there. And people who do take these classes, they like putting this part out first because it thins out the herd. Half the class leaves, especially the really, really die-hard Christians. They're out of there because their faith has just been decimated. And it's a logical proof, and it's solid. There's a lot of other things. You can't have an all-powerful and all-knowing God at the same time. That's another problem. You can either be all-powerful or you can be all-knowing. The ancients knew that. That's why they had multiple gods. But today, people are so dumb, they can't figure it out. You can't have an all-powerful God at the same time being all-knowing.
Well, is that because if you're all-knowing, you'd know the future and your hands would be tied as to what you could do?
That's part of it, yeah. There's other parts to it. An all-powerful God, well, that means they can do anything and everything. Well, that's a heck of a thing coming from him, considering his real claim to fame was being shot down in World War II. I mean, that's his claim to fame. I got more medals than he does. What makes him a patriot and me not? His son is definitely not a patriot. He's about as far from being a patriot as a human could get. He's tearing apart our system. He's destroying his country, piecemeal, little pieces at a time. I wrote this cartoon for American Atheist magazine a few years ago. It shows the Liberty Bell and all of it in a little crack. It says, before George Bush. And then the next frame shows little pieces of the Liberty Bell everywhere. It says, after George Bush. You know, 'cause it totally decimated it. And, you know, as somebody said recently, Iraq needs a new constitution. They should have ours because we're not using it anymore. And that's true.
Yep. I mean, imagine the outcry that there would have been if he would have said something like Jews cannot be true patriots, or blacks cannot be patriots, or Hispanics couldn't be patriots.
He would have been hung up and strung. Ooh, damn. He got the wrong group. We're the peaceful ones. It's true. Yeah, if he would have said that about anybody else, he would have never gone any further in politics. That would have been the end of him. But it's okay to say it about atheists. That's wrong. It is, obviously. What's the difference? You're a bigot.
So do you have any further thoughts about your times in the service?
Oh, there were a lot of good times, a lot of bad times. Military is a great thing. I got to do a lot of things. I got to go around the world, see a lot of things. I got to learn to speak 12 different languages, or at least a few words in 12 different languages, just enough to get my face slapped and get a beer. But that's kind of a fun thing in itself. The other thing that was nice is I got to see the world and all the different religions. When I was in Germany at one beautiful mansion that I'd gone through on this tour, they had a bunch of Bibles, old Bibles from the 15th, 16th century. And I was talking to this guide, and I was asking him why what these pages were open to. One of the things he told me is that his Bibles, the German Bibles, they're different than the American Bibles. For instance, in the American Bibles, you have Joseph and Mary having children, and all this. But in the German Bible, it's different. Joseph raped Mary. It's a big difference. And they still teach that today. The other places, there's so many things that are different. And it taught me that no religion is right, absolutely. That there's all these weird ideas out there. The military's good for that. Bad things, well, yeah, friends died. I damn near did. And, sorry. And it's public access. But, and I wouldn't trade most of that for the world. It was a good thing for me. Where else can you go as a 17-year-old kid and be in charge of millions of dollars worth of equipment, and travel the world? Going to war is another thing. That's not a good thing. The war we got going now is definitely not a good thing. I'm not arguing with Afghanistan, but I do argue about Iraq and going into Iran and things like that. Those wars, possible war in one case, we shouldn't be involved in. That was put up by George Bush #2, and that's a war we shouldn't be involved in. That's a religious war. He wants that war. He really does. And this is something most people forget. In 1991, George Bush #2 said that he believed that Armageddon was going to happen by the year 2005.
Hope that doesn't turn out to be well, obviously it didn't.
Obviously it didn't, yeah, but he's still working on it.
Yeah, that is one of the reasons why religion is not always just a benign diversion. If someone really believes that they are God's chosen instrument to bring about the end of time and to fulfill biblical prophecy. Yeah.
I love biblical prophecy. It's an interesting thing. One of the things about Bibles and biblical prophecy is the Bible is what's called a tautology. That's it's kind of like a circular logic and reasoning. Specifically, it's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's many of them in the Bible. And how they become self-fulfilling is something happens, many years later they write about it. Somebody said there was going to be this, and it happened, therefore it came to be true. That's how it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, gee guys, they're going to write one day about Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan and say these are things that somebody prophesized. Yeah, right, but they wrote it after the fact.
Not only that, but like for instance, the book of Revelation, it looks like, well, personally, I think it looks like something someone could have written after eating some contaminated grain or something.
Yeah, ergot, I believe they call that. Yeah, let's get up there. Yeah, I've never had that, but I've heard something. But there's so many illogical things. For instance, which is hotter according to the Bible, heaven or hell? Do you know? It's an interesting point. And here's something for everybody to think about. In Revelations, it says, the disbeliever shall burneth in a lake of brimstone, right? And one of the things, I can't remember where it is, it says, the light of heaven shall be the light of the sun and the light of the moon times 7 for 7 days. I'm sure most people have heard of that. Now, if you take the light of the moon and the light of the sun times 7 for 7 days, put in this cute little equation, it comes out to 536 degrees centigrade. Now, hell is supposed to be boiling in brimstone. Brimstone is sulfur. Sulfur boils at 425 degrees. Therefore, heaven is 111 degrees hotter than hell. That's in centigrade. And so who really needs the ice cubes, guys? That's one of the illogical things. They never read their Bible. They don't think about it. How can they? It's ridiculous. Go ahead.
Okay, well, one thing, it's really popular for atheists to bash religion. What kind of positive alternatives do we have to offer the world?
Positive alternatives. How about truth, logic, thinking? And why do we need an alternative to religion? What good is religion? Seriously, what good is it? If you're a good person, Does religion make you good? No, that's not true. You either are or you're not good. Religion has nothing to do with it. However, if you teach a person religion, generally speaking, they're going to be even a more terrible person, because they think that they can just sit back and say, oh, gee, God, I'm sorry, you know. They're going to get forgiven. Nah, that's junk. We don't need to replace religion with anything other than logic and critical thinking. Or maybe a lot of gas that gets passed, I don't know.
So what kind of hope then do we have, like for some, let's say for someone who is dying?
Well, once you're dead, you won't have pain. That's the only thing you got going for you. That's it. What kills me is, why are people so concerned about death? Seriously. The moment you're born, the one thing that guaranteed it's going to happen to you, you're going to die. Well, that's the most natural thing out there. Once you're born, you're going to die. Why are you afraid of it? Why would you need religion to give you this mental image of all the whiteness and floating around? Gee, why waste your time on that? I think it's ridiculous.
Well, it's like, you know, I read in an engineering magazine a couple years ago, they were talking about human lifespans in terms of reliability theory, and they're saying that the human body behaves like a machine composed of redundant but defective from the get-go parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We really don't understand life all the way through. We don't. That doesn't mean we have to assign it to religion to figure it out. But with science today, we are learning so much on a day-by-day basis about what is life, how does it work, how does our cells duplicate, and everything. I read roughly 100 articles a day on science, different areas of science. You can't keep up with it, and that's just 5 to 6 paragraphs per item. If you combined all of the data in one day of what is being generated in terms of knowledge about evolution, you'd have, this is an estimate, you'd have a stack of papers roughly 1,300 feet tall. That's in one day. Now, but we do know enough to say evolution is a fact, it is real, it's been verified, it's been falsified, it's been reproduced. It is a fact. And we also know enough to say that someday we may extend our lifespans by quite a bit. When I was born, the average lifespan was 67 years. Now it's something like 78. And I'm not telling my age, but I'm up there. And I hope to live to be 70, my mid-70s. But my grandparents, all of my grandparents lived over 90. And when they were children, 90 was almost unheard of anywhere in the world.
I think back then the life expectancy in the U.S. was about 40 or so, wasn't it?
Yeah. At the turn of the century, I think it was 45, turn of the 19th century. And now we're up there quite a ways. They estimate that we can probably sustain our bodies relatively well to about 145 to 150 years. And it's not that many more years off before they'll be able to do it.
Tell me about your involvement in atheist activism over the years.
I started out in the mid-late 70s in Tucson, Arizona. And I'd been working at the local level for a couple of years when Madeline O'Hare showed up to help us argue a case in front of the city council. And they were opening their council meetings with prayers. So I got to meet her then. And I had already been a member, I think about 2.5 years at that time. After that, in 1982, I started getting involved because I had the time. I started getting involved at the street fair we had in Tucson, Arizona. It was on twice a year. It was a 3-day event. And then 2 years later, I took over the booth and ran the whole thing. And I did that up until 1993. I worked with Madeline O'Hare and others on a number of issues, including veterans issues. And we started up American Atheist Veterans in 1989, partially because of the comments by George Bush, #1. we can't be citizens or atheists. And we basically said, to heck with you. We got the organization started, and Madeline was the commander. And she got sick in 1991 and turned it over to me. And I became the national commander. I did that for about 2 years, and then I went to work at national headquarters. I was in charge of the media department. I did the television show. I was in charge of editing and all that for a couple of years. Then the O'Hares had come up missing. As we now know, they were murdered. And I took over as national director in 1995 and did that until 1999, when I came back to Michigan, because I didn't want to go to New Jersey. It's just, no thanks. It's right across the street from New York City. No thank you. It was not a place for me. And my health was going downhill pretty bad by then. So that was enough. And came back to Michigan here and with some old friends, old hippie type friends, and here I am. I've enjoyed it. I've had a lot of fun. And I'm getting back involved as my health. I've had a number of surgeries and my health's getting back up. So it's time for me to be active again. But it's also time for the younger ones to get active.
Oh, yes.
Us old guys are getting up there, and it's getting pretty bad. When I started, I was about average age, about 27 or so for the local group. They were all in the mid-20s to mid-30s. And yet we don't seem to have the inflow of the kids that we should have to build up the ranks from the bottom up.
Yeah, it seems like the evangelical Christian groups are really active, like on the college campuses. But I don't know if the atheist groups are as active there.
No, unfortunately, one of the problems we have is getting atheists together, because it's kind of like herding ducks with a couple of German shepherds on steroids, and they're just running around scaring the ducks. You just can't get them together in a group. It's a real hard problem. Well, one of the things we'd like to do is we'd like to get into schools and things like that. Churches get into schools all the time. They get their literature in illegally. And it'd be nice if we could do the same thing. But they're not going to allow us in, which is really a shame. Because I think we're a lot better for kids than religion is. That's obvious.
To share?
A few closing thoughts. I've said over and over that atheists are the, moral intelligentsia of our society. Because we are moral. We're far more moral than any religious group. And the average IQ of an atheist is 122. That's 3.5 years of college. No other group out there is anywhere near as close to that as we are. Other things are, think about this. Can you name a rapist, a serial rapist, or a serial killer in the United States who was an atheist? No, they've all been religious. You just don't find any. There's one man that we know of who was an atheist on death row. One man in this country is an atheist. The rest are religious. There's thousands of them. And they claim to be the moral. No, they're not. We are the moral. We're the intelligent ones. We're the moral ones, and we're the most discriminated against. Something is wrong in this country. It's time we work to fix it.
All right. Well, Spike, thanks for coming to the studio today.
I thank you, Bob. A pleasure, and hopefully sometime we'll get back and talk about some other issues, maybe not quite as serious.
Okay. That was Spike Tyson, Vietnam veteran and longtime atheist activist. This is Atheists Speak Up, a production of Michigan Atheists. Thank you for watching.
Howdy, folks. My name is Hal Downs, and I'm the president of Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, Michigan. And I'm honored to be the guest host today on Atheists Speak Up. Our special guest is George Schiffer. He is the Assistant State Director of Michigan Atheists, and he's here today to talk about a particularly interesting and timely subject. Hi, George.
Hi, Hal.
Today we're going to talk about Thanksgiving. George, can you give us some information about the history of Thanksgiving?
With pleasure. Most ideas become corrupted over time. With each telling of an event, the details change, embellishments added, until more often than not, the current perception of the event is unrecognizable from the original telling. Thanksgiving is no exception. Like many other holidays that began as something else, Christianity stole Thanksgiving for themselves. They did it to Christmas, adopting the pagan winter solstice celebrations for ease of marketing their religion to people who did not want to give up their traditions. They did it to Halloween, which began as a pagan harvest festival. With the exception of Easter, most holidays Christians recognize began as pagan or non-religious traditions.
Well, now that's very interesting. Can you tell us something about the mythology surrounding Thanksgiving?
Well, there is about many historical events. People tend to want to fictionalize and glorify events to make themselves feel good about them. Many times, one of the first efforts to embellish these occurrences is to give them a religious flavor that wasn't part of the actual history at all.
Give us an example.
Certainly. One example is a religious connotation that has been given to the folding of the American flag during the honoring of a fallen soldier. The flag is folded several times until it terminates in a small, nice, neat square about 3 inches thick. Religion has come up with a meaning for each fold of the flag. The religious meaning has nothing to do with the actual ceremony, but religion has attached itself to it nonetheless. Just as it does to many things people respect and revere. Another example is the tragedy of 9/11, where an act perpetrated by religious fanatics was portrayed as an act of atheistic evil, or else the fault of one group of perceived sinners or another. The perpetrators were undeniably fanatical Muslims, not atheists, but religious people will disassociate themselves with horrific acts committed by religionists, just as they will associate themselves and their religion with those that are respected and revered.
I see. Well, let's get back to Thanksgiving.
Absolutely. Religious people tend to perceive Thanksgiving to be a religious celebration. As a matter of historical fact, the first Thanksgiving, which took place in 1621, was not religious. It was not a religious celebration at all. It was a secular event. Between the more or less non-religious Native Americans, the Native Americans had no temples, priests, holy book, or religious dogma, and the Pilgrims. It was not even called Thanksgiving. It was simply a get-together between the Pilgrims and the natives. Native Americans to celebrate the fall harvest.
Well, how was this first Thanksgiving celebrated?
The people present at the first Thanksgiving had 3 fun-filled days of dancing, singing of secular songs, and eating. It wouldn't have been called Thanksgiving for 2 reasons. First, Thanksgiving in that time was a giving of thanks in a church for a particular event. And second, it was a secular event. It was based on the English harvest festivals, which usually took place about that time of year.
How did Thanksgiving become perceived as a religious holiday?
Following the first harvest festival, Governor Bradford proclaimed a day of thanksgiving and prayer, in which the colonists and neighboring Native Americans took part. Gradually, over the years, states began to declare it a time of thanksgiving and prayer. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln proclaimed Thanksgiving to be the last Thursday of November, and all subsequent presidents have issued a Thanksgiving Day proclamation. President Franklin Roosevelt proclaimed it the 4th Thursday in November. so now it has become an entrenched religious holiday, but it began as a harvest festival. Thanksgiving is an excellent example of how religion, particularly the Christian religion, steals from history to make a respected event its own.
Now, getting back to the mythology surrounding Thanksgiving, can you give us some examples of this?
Yes, many myths have come out of that secular event of feasting and merrymaking of 1621. The Pilgrims have been portrayed as wearing neat black and white costumes with belt buckles on their shoes. The black and white costumes were worn only on religious occasions, but not on this event, because it was not religious, it was secular. Belt buckles also were not part of the costume, because they were not generally worn until the later in the 17th century. Another myth is that the Pilgrims had a sumptuous meal of turkey, corn, cranberries, and pumpkin pie. They had run out of sugar, so there was none to make cranberries or pumpkin pie. There was much wild fowl and deer, so these were probably the mainstay of their 3-day feast. But it most assuredly was not the sumptuous meal depicted in the stigmatized pictures of this event.
Now, you keep saying that the first Thanksgiving was a secular harvest festival, but how do we know for sure?
The Puritans recognized 3 kinds of holidays as sanctioned. They were the Sabbath, days of Thanksgiving, and days of fasting. The governor proclaimed them only in response to specific events, such as times of drought or war. The governor might proclaim a day of Thanksgiving after a good harvest or much-needed rainfall. The event of 1621 had many secular elements and would not have been considered a religious day of Thanksgiving by the Pilgrims, who celebrated these events in a very specific and meticulously documented way.
Well, that was very enlightening, George. Thank you very much for coming today and telling us about the history of Thanksgiving.
And thank you, Hal.
You're welcome.